System check initiated. Acknowledged. Link established.
DePIN Unplugged podcast starting now.
Hello, I am Tristan, and this is episode 4 of DePIN Unplugged with Superteam Germany. I'm here and I'm joined with Abhay today from Helium. So really excited to get started and dive into this. So real quick, Abhay, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Helium?
Yeah. So I'm Abhay Kumar. I run the protocol side of the Helium network. What that means is I work on the sort of engineering and product and sort of everything that like lives on chain with the Helium network. I also work for Nova Labs, the opco that started the Helium network and is the sort of major contributor. We also run a wireless carrier in the United States called Helium Mobile. And we can dive into each one of those things during the next hour or so. But yeah, generally speaking, been in the crypto. This is like my first large project in the crypto ecosystem, but been at this for now over 6 years. Before this, really only ever worked in sort of Bitcoin related infrastructure. But yeah, that's me.
Amazing. So just to get started, I always love to get people's insight on what is DePIN. So what is DePIN? Why do we need it? And what are the benefits of using decentralization with regards to physical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, DePIN is a term that I guess got cooked up after we started, which is fun. We got lumped in, but the general idea is that it is a way to deploy infrastructure, specifically physical infrastructure, um, uh, through a community-driven approach to sort of aggregate some kind of latent capacity for some kind of function that's needed by a lot of people. In our case, what that means is it allows individuals to deploy radios and become cell phone operators or cell tower operators, really, and support a network for cellular devices and other kinds of devices. And what's interesting about that ultimately is that it sort of distributes the capital requirements for building such a network or building such a new kind of network like this. It sort of enables new kinds of businesses to be built because of that kind of access to much cheaper, much more distributed, much more available physical infrastructure. And so I think for me, the important things about DePIN really is that physicality where, location, matters. And that location might be, sort of coarse geography. It could be, country, city, country, city, state, or it could be very specific, right? It could be, block level. So there are DePIN networks that really do depend on, being on the same block as your customers. For us, for cellular connectivity, as the sort of we have to solve for what's fundamentally a physics problem. You can't have very high power radios that is able to support super high bandwidth applications and put just a few of them in places. You need actually a lot of distribution. You need a lot of individual nodes to sort of support the demands that are coming from cellular networks. And so yeah, that's what we think DePIN is about. There are other opinions out there, and I think they're all wrong.
Well, this is the definitive opinion on DePIN. You got to hear. So for one of the things that's really interesting is like being a first mover in this. What was it called when you first started? The pre-DePIN terminology.
I don't know if there was a name. I mean,
It was
we had
Helium.
Helium. Yeah, it was Helium. And then there were a few other examples, right? We borrowed certainly from networks like Filecoin and LivePeer, which did exist before us. And, I think these are, we sort of borrowed the sort of model of how to distribute and deploy and provide these services. And then we sort of took it, sort of in a different direction. I know there's like, DePIN and Helium inspired physical infrastructure networks and a bunch of other things that were out there. But, I think DePIN's the term that people have landed on with this kind of model. I mean, I think Helium, we are fortunate to have sort of landed on this sort of cellular connectivity problem, which has a tremendous amount of demand. And we're sort of able to show that, there's two sides of this network truly, and there's actual activity.
So what are just walk me through maybe some of the challenges of getting started and deploying all of the nodes that were necessary to make Helium a success?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several risks to starting something like this, right? There's everything from what is does this model even work? Who's going to actually use it? Can we trust this model? What are the sort of what are sort of the constraints that exist when you just first get started? And it's important to very, very rapidly deploy coverage in a very sort of concentrated area that provides immediate value. Because ultimately you're sort of racing towards getting to product market fit with any of these kinds of networks. For me, when I talk to a founder about DePIN in general, I mean, I think this is just in general for any product, is who's the net buyer of the product, right? Is the most important thing. And getting to that sort of proof early on is important. For us, the net buyer is our carriers, right? Folks that want connectivity, that aren't able to get it in all the places where they need it. We've seen a lot of success indoors, where traditional cell phone towers can't penetrate at high bandwidth, and it's hard to go to every single coffee shop and say, hey, install this device. And then, our customers will have better connectivity. A coffee shop owner will either, never be reached, which is most of the case. If they are reached by some kind of door-to-door sales system or program, they often will say, oh, well, what's in it for me? Right. And we've seen cellular carriers sort of experiment with this in the past. I remember, 20 years ago, you could buy these like cell phone extenders for your house. Literally what they were, they plugged into your home internet. They used those home internet, sort of whatever connectivity you had, and your cell phone worked. But like, you as an individual were mad. Like, why am I sort of giving you my internet for that? Um, isn't this your job? I'm not getting paid or anything for this. And this is really the sort of different thing about DePIN is that you're sort of allowing the individuals to participate, see economic value, not only for themselves and sort of practical value, not only for themselves, but also for, let's say their neighbors or their customers, depending on what kind of network it is.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Also, like how there are like challenges, I think, and also some of the guerrilla aspects of this. So getting that coffee shop owner to be aware of helium in the first place. Um, did you find that there was a lot of like the door to door discussions? Like how do you build the network to drive the network effects?
That's where the community comes into play, right? The individuals who are actually deploying uh, may not be the ones that are actually hosting these devices and hosting the actual network devices. So we see this today. We have in traditional telco and other kinds of and other verticals, you have this sort of service provider model, right, or a managed service provider model for connectivity. You have managed service providers are the ones that usually run the telco infrastructure or the wireless infrastructure for an airport or for a mall or for a restaurant group. It's not the head chef is not the one that's running the Wi-Fi for the restaurant, unless they might be initially, at least for the small ones. So that those guys, the actual owners of these establishments aren't experts, and nor should they be. These sort of service providers come in, they provide, not only, connectivity solutions, they might also allow for, they might also be your contact for your point of sale. Maybe for certain, kinds of, they're a vendor for you already for other materials that you need to run your business. And so, these are the folks who I think are the most powerful for deploying on the ground. Certainly you will have the long tail of individuals saying, yeah, I own a coffee shop. This is my coffee shop. I will install this thing. I'm interested. You'll have those folks, but I find that sort of middle, um, uh, sort of participant to be really, really helpful to deploy these at scale.
Yeah, I think that underlies like a huge theme in I think successful projects in the blockchain space is really underlined by community. I mean, that's how I feel. So plug Superteam a little bit. I think that's one of the advantages that Superteam has is like plugging in all the community on like a community scale, like internationally and bringing people together to promote projects within the Solana ecosystem. I think that's like a huge factor. And I think that extends to when you look at any successful projects in the cryptosphere, a large percentage of those projects have a very strong community backing, like a very active community backing that's really passionate about what it is that project represents. So I think like that's such a huge thing. And do you find or do you see that there's any roadblocks that come into play with building that community, or do you think that there's like ceilings to it, or like what are like some of the challenges with developing further on the community
Yeah.
aspect?
I mean, I think there's a certain amount of scale that where it's very easy, right? Like Helium, the first version of the community was a Slack group. And
Slack.
we had to move from Slack to Discord, and that scaled up for a certain amount of time, and that Discord turned into hundreds, maybe 1,000 channels, one for each country, which essentially became this kind of moderation, I'll be direct about it, nightmare. A small group of moderators trying to manage, a massive, really like surface area ultimately. And since then we've actually stopped using our Discord. We've migrated almost entirely onto X and Reddit. And has its own growing pains. But, ultimately, like every team and every project needs to sort of adapt to where the size is. I think there's a lot of value in one-on-one conversations, group conversations, working groups. Those are the ways to scale at different stages. And then, you end up, ultimately hopefully not changing too much about the economic side of the protocol. Um, and And then you don't need the sort of massive community conversation around the economics of the protocol. It is what it is. It's fixed, right? Like you can participate, or you can not, and that's a choice. You can participate by opening a pull request or not. Like that's also a choice. Like these are all like things that sort of change over time, and you have to sort of react to the demands of the network. Ultimately, the demand of the network is the demand of the product that you're offering, right? If you're offering a cellular service, you need to provide the best possible like Wi-Fi offload service that you have, and make sure that the economics are aligned to fit that. And so changes happen over time. Community changes over time. I think it's always important to have good tools to hear the community, right, and understand what the demands are. And there'll always be like different levels of noise based on where the chart is. But like ultimately, like if you take the long view, you summarize, you iterate, and you keep shipping, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely. Always keep shipping. Most important thing. Yeah. But with that, like it's always important because then you get the feedback and you're always learning the lessons. And so one of the things that you were just touching on are these economic factors and the involvement of community and driving some of those economic decisions. Helium is like a really interesting case study with that in mind and the way that networks evolved over time. So I would love to hear your perspective on just the evolution of the with respect to the economic approach that Helium's taken over time and kind of where you see it going into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made so many different changes, I think, and it's I can understand communities get confused by the sort of significant changes as well that have happened. I mean, I've definitely heard, so we started off as a single token model with HNT. We always had the concept of data credits in mind, including the original sort of design. But then we actually deployed it after the network launched. And then when we implemented it, then we moved from, individual hotspots running the consensus group. So we started as our own chain. I'll sort of mention that very quickly. So individual hotspots running the consensus group that sort of made sure that all the transactions landed, and moved towards validators. And then, and that had an economic change associated with it. And then we moved from validators, or before we moved from validators to Solana, we introduced this concept of subnetworks and subtokens. We had to sort of design around that. And then we moved from the validator model with the subtokens to Solana and introduced, new changes based on that. Changes to governance happened along the way. At some point, we decided that the sort of network of networks model was a distraction for where we were. And we really needed to double down on building the same way that we needed to stop running our own chain to support a wireless network. We need to double down on wireless networks. We also sort of saw this need to double down on the thing that was providing a lot of demand, which is mobile, and not try to chase after the 12th network that could have been part of the network of networks. And so we rolled back the token models, the multi-token model. And so, yeah, we've made so many changes along the way, and I'm sure for folks who see the Helium network maybe once a quarter or once a year, are like, wait a minute, this is all different again, right? And then that's something that I think we can always do better on comms, right? Like you can always do better on comms, but at some point you have to also try to reach the 80% or the 90% and move on, and allow people to catch up.
And I think that also circles back to the keep shipping. So you probably, I mean, it sounds like this was a lot of learning throughout the way of like, all right, so running our own blockchain is a distraction. And that's a very good lesson to have like pretty early on. So you can focus on the product side, I would say.
Yeah. And I think, at the time, like if I look back at the decisions, I would have made those same decisions, right? Knowing what I know now, well, back then, like we had no idea that Solana would be what it is, or really any chain would be what it is, right?
I mean, when you started, did it even exist?
No. And ETH wasn't an option, and there was a crazy idea of running Bitcoin miners on these hotspots, which would have significantly increased the energy draw of these things. And didn't make sense ultimately, for a variety of reasons. But like, that we sort of went through a lot of the sort of machinations to figure out, and we landed on running our own chain. Um, you know, that's it's pretty normal, right? Like you have to sort of go through that process.
Yeah, I mean that's everything. Everything is. It's like, and all the cliches are true, right? Like the hindsight is 2020, or like
Mhm.
but you operate on the best information you have at the time. So it's like, okay, here's the environment, here's how it exists, here's how we can best solve the solution, given the constraints of today's technology, and that's always evolving. So it's like it's crazy how quickly a lot of the technology evolves. Like even thinking about AI right now, it's so crazy because the way I would have built something 5 years ago is completely different, just thinking with AI in mind, or 3 years ago.
For
It's
sure.
pretty crazy how quickly it changes.
I mean, like I was down to just doing code reviews like several months ago. I wasn't writing a lot of code myself. And I'm back to writing code again. And that's like the massive unlock for me to be able to like prototype something very, very quickly and ship it within hours or minutes sometimes. Um, that's incredible, right? And I think companies are going to be built very, very differently.
Yeah. So do you use it directly in your workflow now? Like, is the first thing you do go to the AI? I would like to build this.
Not uh Sometimes, not always. There are definitely times where it is easier for me to reason around, and maybe I'm being a luddite in this scope, I guess, in some scope of luddite here. But like, I think I don't go immediately to the AI yet. Um, I and for what it's worth, like I didn't start using Claude on the command line without an IDE until maybe about a month ago. Um, but even in that month, like I'm just way more productive than I've ever been. I mean, like it is, but like I think that's the speed that things are happening. Wasn't it just like 4 weeks ago the like Ralph Wiggum tool existed or became a thing, and like yesterday the Anthropic guys basically made it pointless with the to-do list feature, right? Like that's just like that's the speed of things are going. um I think what's important is people that are building things, not just engineers, product managers, go to market people, everybody should be at least understanding what they can do and what the limitations are with these tools, and then they should like try to actually use it, I think. And like understand that it might hallucinate, understand that like when you're writing a doc you might need to rewrite it a bunch because it's like making up shit. um but like I think it's like also important to like you have to be aware of what these tools are and the amount of productivity gains that they provide you, or you're going to be behind.
That's true, but it's honestly it's crazy to me because even it's to that point of how quickly things can be rendered obsolete. Um, like I just thought it would be fun to build a productivity app for myself because I was like, I don't feel like paying the subscription fee for all of these. And it's surprising how easy it is to make, because like I made an app that's going to gives me a daily rundown. Since at my company we just use Google Workspace. So I just
Yep.
plug it into the Google APIs. I can get all of my email, all of my messages, everything there. I plugged into the GitLab APIs, so I get all the GitLab code updates directly there, and I can get a daily rundown. And this was like, I don't know, probably less than like 6 hours of coding effort on my mostly AI coding effort on my part,
um
just reviewing and plugging in setters and things. It's
yeah,
crazy to me how easy it is.
I have the same. So I have a little bit more of a complicated version of that. We have a house AI. It's essentially uh, all of our data, all of my data, all of my wife's data. It has everything about our kids, schedules, everything. It flags stuff like us, like things that are conflicts. It allows us to manage childcare. I mean, it does a lot of things, and it's like on Signal. Like I talk to it on Signal. And
Wild.
it just works, right? Like, well, the Signal API is a lot easier than the iMessage. Like iMessage, you have to like get weird integration. You have to run a Mac Mini permanently, essentially, for that. But yeah, like, so Signal's API just worked for me.
Probably more secure also than
I mean, it's technically still running on a Mac Mini in my house. So if you could, you can break in there. I'm apt, I guess. But it's hard enough to get to my network. Let's put it that way.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool the way that you can integrate these technologies now into your day-to-day life. And yeah, you could run your own private AI and then have it as your personal assistant, essentially. And obviously, yeah, it's also interesting to me, like the way this changes, like how we all can like work with each other. Because also like before we had this, you would need like a personal assistant to handle all of like that level of complexity. And now you can have a Mac Mini or even more lightweight. You could probably do something on a Raspberry Pi and get something pretty basic.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, these models are, yeah, you don't need like a fan. This Mac Mini is a M1, by the way. It's not like the latest, greatest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it doesn't need much. You're absolutely right. Like you need storage. You need, you basically need storage and connectivity.
That's it. And you can run one of these.
Yeah, exactly. I have like Llama running on it too. So like, it falls back to using Olama and then warns me that hey, I used Olama for this. But that's about it.
That's awesome. So yeah, to take us back to the connectivity, one of the things I'm really curious is like, where do you see AI playing into the future of Helium, or just generally more broadly connectivity and how we connect our devices?
And I think that there's sort of two sides of this. One side of this is, AI is going to require us to have a lot better connectivity. Full stop. Right. The point that I just made, like some of these models, like the foundation models, you can't really run locally. And so if you're willing to use these models, which I think the majority of people will be, they need connectivity to them. And so that's number one. I think, the other side of this is how do these networks get built using AI, and how does AI enhance these networks? And so, we've spent quite a bit of time on this inside of Helium. There is a tremendous gap in telemetry when you're building not just cellular networks, but more so in the Wi-Fi networks that are being used like by Helium and by others for offload. They're combining the information about connectivity quality, QoS, right, for these devices, and like really being able to be sort of dynamically modify, what are the shape of networks, essentially, being able to immediately tell you what's going on with their customers, how your customers are experiencing your networks. These are things that agents can help guide and can help build. I think ultimately over time we'll actually be building these networks themselves, recommending where we sort of deploy these things, and then you can imagine the agent is actually telling a community directly what to do. Right? Hey, go deploy here. Right? And that's and here's why. These this hundreds of customers are sort of starving for data. Go deploy here. We do this kind of very manually today, but I think that gets more automated over time. So I think there's an option, sort of there's going to be even more demand. Not that there isn't demand already for data connectivity, but there's going to be even more demand coming from users, and then these networks are going to need to be even more resilient and more adaptable to that demand. So I think AI sort of has an input in both of those sides.
And so as it ends up being kind of like a load balance or an auto balancer of like where the connectivity needs to be provided. So it's like there's more people here or there's more demand here. We're seeing I'm just like, I guess in my head I'm imagining it as like a heat map where you see like the heat level rise, and so it's like, oh, we don't have enough like nodes in this specific area, so then there's an incentive to deploy a node in that area. that's provided.
Yep.
Interesting. So how I think for me, one of the interesting things is, like where the AI role is. So if it's like super manual right now, you have an AI that's operating, and then the AI is at deploying some type of like machine learning model. Like, is it self, I don't know, like self-identifying all of the data points that are needed to be identified to make decisions, autonomous decisions?
We're somewhere in that path. Full automation will take time. And at some point you need, the meat space contributors to actually go do the work
Yeah.
as well. But I think it's scale of like, if you have hundreds of people or hundreds of phones in a geographic area, you can gather a lot of information. And one of the things that we've been working on with some of the standards bodies here is to sort of standardize how to collect this information so that these networks can be resilient to demand, right? It's not just, a lot of connectivity has been built around guaranteeing, like it's almost like lifeline connectivity, like making sure that there is connectivity. Um, uh, and mostly because of, like, I would say probably because of subsidies, right? Like there's a lot of value in making sure that there's lifeline connectivity in a lot of places, and companies are able to sort of see that value, fairly directly. Like, hey, if I put a radio here, I connect these many people, I get paid this much money, right? Like that's kind of what they think about. But quality of service is sort of the next step after that. Like you start with lifeline, then you go to like making actual value and quality, and then from there it's how do you adapt very quickly. COVID taught a lot of these network providers how flexible you have to be. A lot of people went to the home, and so home broadband networks were a lot more constrained, arguably more so than like the advent of like Netflix and other kinds of streaming. And so like, we had two major things in the last, 20 years or so that sort of required network deployers to change the way they deploy networks, right? Streaming one, and then COVID two, people working from home.
And then what's going to be the next big event?
I mean, I think it's this need to be permanently connected, right? And that's where the sort of, I think that sort of comes back to that point around having the AIs like, on device, on your phone, on your car, in sort of places where you are at all times. Like that is the, that's sort of where the, where like we'll see the demand happening. It's like, well, I can't connect to my thing that sort of tells me about the world anymore, right?
So do you see this evolving into this massive mesh network of devices that are providing connectivity? So like you have devices in your car, like maybe even like the phone has something optimized within it.
Perhaps. I mean, I think that I think we are seeing a pretty big shift, and relevant to the stuff that you're working on here around satellite connectivity and sort of directive device connectivity, over the next, I don't know how long it'll take exactly. Like I can guess that it'll probably be sooner rather than later, though, that, a lot of our devices will be direct to cell or direct to device plus, something else, terrestrial. That is like our phones are kind of marvels, right? Like how many radios are in this thing, right? Like they're,
A lot.
and you can add a lot more, right? And so like, or you can modify some of them, right? And so I think ultimately, like that's where we're going. I think that's where all devices are going. Those sort of those radios will get smaller and sort of better and more power efficient and all of that. And so then we'll see, it in everything, right? In our cars, in our self-driving cars, in our regular cars, in our phones, maybe even our watches. We'll see.
Yeah, I think and it's interesting what you can do to that point of what you can do with these radios, and especially as they continue to get smaller, because there's so much that we're already doing. Like it's actually crazy when you think about all the radio potential of a phone, like between like the GNSS capabilities of connecting to just all the GNSS that's out there. Like, okay, like that's pretty amazing. Like, and what blew me away is that not every phone has the same radios in it for connecting to GNSS. Like some can connect to like I mean, almost everyone can connect it to GPS, but not every phone has the capability to like say go to GLONASS or Baidu. So yeah, I was like, okay, that's what
That's right.
interesting.
That's right.
And then on the this hyperconnectivity point, like it gets into this, I guess, this like QoS. So once everybody has a basic lifeline, it's like create the how do you create the experience that everybody's looking for? Like, can you run like super quick like connections everywhere on the planet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how are you application aware, right? Like you know, if I'm in an area that has a lot of demand and I'm the one streaming, whatever, like the latest soccer game or whatever's live right now, versus like someone who just needs access to Uber and needs to, get it going somewhere. Like that latter application should have priority, right? Like get that person out of there and then go back to streaming. Right. Well,
But then it gets weighted. Like, how important is this person who needs to get out of there, and how important is the soccer game to the person who's watching it? Like, is it the coach of just?
there's likely a cost model there, right?
It's a cost model. Yeah, it's the prioritization. Like, you have like I guess like a societal benefit maybe tier, and then you have a premium priority customer tier.
Right. Or allow in the sort of DePIN way of doing things, allow the deployer to define here's my prioritization, or here's how I would like to prioritize it. And sure, like have some reasonable defaults and have some network steering and network management. But like ultimately the individual node should be able to say, like, I get paid more with this, like that, like, Manchester United game versus the, I don't know, Everton game. Like, let's stream that one, like, or something.
Uh, so that's really interesting to think about. Like if we have like these blockchain backends, which is ultimately what I see like the end game for DePIN is you have like a blockchain backend that's interfacing with like everybody interacts with it, but they don't necessarily know that they're interacting with crypto. So it's just like something that's providing a service that they need, which is how do I watch this Edmonton game or whatever game, Manchester United game, and so for me, it'd be interesting to get your insight and your perspective on like where you see blockchain's position in the future and how people are going to be interacting with it. Not even, but maybe it's Helium Mobile. They download the Helium mobile app, they get a plan, and they start using the service. They don't have to necessarily think about buying any Solana or anything or having a wallet to start using.
I mean,
Helium Mobile. Yeah,
I think that's the only way that this technology, which is ultimately what we're building here, it's this technology is gets us anywhere, right? Like, and gets to the right number of users that even makes sense for the amount of investment that's going into it so far, right? I think ultimately and this, it took us a while to get there, as well. Like ultimately, users don't care that you're running on Solana. They care about the connectivity.
yeah, that's all that matters at the end of the day is like, can I connect when somebody else can't, or can I connect when I need to call home or check my portfolio or whatever it is they're doing on their phone.
Yep, exactly. And I think that, that is, I think you're right that ultimately, if you want to allow if you believe that, allowing individuals to operate these networks and these sort of antennas of the network, and that's sort of valuable, and, to sort of build your kind of network in a different way, and you want the individuals to be able to have parameters and have control and have their, sort of sovereignty of their assets. Um, the only way to coordinate that is with like a very like essentially like a multivariate marketplace, right? Like you need to have the marketplace be defined, likely in code, because this stuff happens so fast that you can't have humans brokering anything. So you need to have the marketplace, and that marketplace needs to run on a very, very, very fast, like highly in sync ledger that's distributed, right? Like that's really the only way that you can do this. And I think that it's sort of it's the expansion of where NASDAQ and NYSE and the public markets are, right? Like there are the millions and millions of messages that run on these networks to sort of, and there's many, many orders of magnitude fewer of actual economic transactions that happen. And like, there are many layers of, many, many orders of magnitude fewer than that where retail participates, right? Like, so I think that's like sort of the ultimately retail, which is what we're serving, is what we should think about. And so the sort of 3 layers deep of that, where like the blockchain is irrelevant to the user. And then I think that's how these products should be built.
Yeah, I completely agree. So it's always interesting to think about like the direction this goes. So what do you think are in the future, like what do you think are like the next big use cases of this technology being successful in a mainstream adoption? So being blockchain as a backend, facilitating the transactions that are benefiting, say, somebody. Is it energy? Do we see more of this in the energy space? 'Cause I think the connectivity space is like I'm very biased towards that being like a big use case.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think we have a little echo chamber going here. We like to put.
We for sure are gonna have an echo chamber in that one.
Right.
What are
Right.
some other use cases that would be?
I mean, I think connectivity is great, but outside of that, yes, energy I think is very, very interesting. I think the sort of it fits with the model well. We're already seeing um, VPPs deployed by centralized companies, right? And seeing some of these come through sort of decentralized networks is interesting. I think we're seeing lots of examples of this. Like we have Daylight and Fuse and there's so many of these things out there and Sourceful and others. Like there's just like so many options out there that are sort of experimenting in this space, all in different sort of forms, all with different economic models. I mean, like Glow's economic model is very different than Fuse's, which is very different than Daylight's, which is very different than Sourceful, right? Like that's great. Like these all let all these like go, and each one of them will learn something. And we may converge on like, 1 or 2 different ways of doing these things that are significantly different than the sort of traditional way of building energy infrastructure. Um, and it might be sort of vertical focus, right? The thing that works for data center energy will be very different than what works for home energy. And like, that's okay. Like, let's, allowing that kind of market forces to determine what makes sense. I think will sort of provide better connectivity and better energy for us. I think there's probably other spaces that make sense. I'm sort of separating the financial applications off for a second. But I think that there will be other emergent verticals where this makes sense. For me, connectivity and energy make the most sense.
Yeah, and that's definitely the first two that come to my mind is like connectivity, energy, because like those you have you need kind of the large geographic coverage. So there's like a huge geographic coverage demand for it. And then there is like a dynamic aspect to the demand that can be very well accounted for with blockchain organization as the backend.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's two critical components to it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's right. And the demand for those two things are the highest as well, right? And only getting worse.
And only getting worse. Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, I think that you also see convergence towards those things too. So it's like there's a lot of like, what is like what's the basic need of people? Like, what are the basic needs that exist? And usually things converge towards those. And like, so connectivity is like a really big long-term need. Like ever since we've been able to have like mobile communications, like it's been like, oh, okay, like we need that. That's something that you have to have. Or even before then, like the satellite communications was like the first thing. That's the first like civilian use case or military. One of the first military use cases to go to space. It's like, okay, let's be able to talk to somebody on the other side of the planet or relay some type of information from here to the other side of the planet that somebody else can hear. That somebody else can get the information that I want to send to them. So it's just one of those fun. I mean, that's why SpaceX started doing Starlink. So they're like, okay, well, we have a cap on launching, so what's something that everybody needs? Oh, connectivity. So I guess like to that point, it's really interesting for me to like think about like what do you see like your position working with some of the legacy infrastructure connectivity as Helium working with some of the, I guess, traditional names that come to mind.
I mean, I think that ultimately it starts with skepticism, right? As always. Um, and then you sort of do the pilot, or you do the sort of you sort of show the existing pilots, and then it turns into like curiosity. And then and then it goes from there towards actually deploying and shipping, right? That is what happened with AT&T here in the United States for us. That is what's happening with Telefonica in Mexico. That's, what we hope will happen. We're sort of early in that path in Brazil, and and more to come, right? Hopefully, right? Like Germany, like they're the Europe. I haven't. There is one person who runs a Ubiquity network in Germany that supports Helium Mobile. So you got to go find him. His name is Chris, and if you have a Helium Mobile SIM, it'll automatically connect to his home network. Not to dox him or anything. He's kind of a well-known community member, and he's talked about this before. So, and you could unfortunately see it on a map, so you can find him. But yeah, like I think all these, I think traditional telco is right to be skeptical initially, because it completely breaks their way of building things for the last 50 plus years, right? The traditional way of building things is, well, I have to go buy a tower, or I have to buy some real estate. I have to build this tower thing. I got to hang a radio on it, and then I have to go back up that radio and like connect it to upgrade its connectivity over time. Maybe upgrade the radio over time. There's just like so many steps there. But ultimately, it gets you to some customer. Like the true cost of acquisition for a customer isn't like the ad spend to get them to convert. It's the entire infrastructure build out that you had to get to be able to do the ads that allows you to convert, right? We're talking in the US like thousands of dollars, including all the spectrum grants and the hardware and the deployments, and that's where the real costs come out. And I don't think it's just like straight up like $200 CAC or $500 CAC. And that's the part that's hidden, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and how do you even calculate that? That's so hard because like you also have to like depend on how many carriers you end up with.
That's right.
How do you calculate this?
I mean, I think you calculate it by ultimately getting to the final number. Like, how many customers did you have, and how much money did you spend to get there? Right? Like, that's the only way to do it. With like any amount of like honesty. And what we see is that thousands of dollars that it costs to get a single customer. And we see this with acquisitions, often with MVNOs, and the costs that are sort of expressed in publicly filed statements by the MNOs that are publicly traded. We see it, thousands of dollars to acquire a single customer, not like some of the hundreds, right? And if I can tell you that it costs us a few $100s to acquire a customer, like Helium's already way more efficient. Like all the fundraising we've ever done, all of the the kinds of things that we've done to get us to where we are, and the costs that we've had, is worth it. Like we have a better model, and I think that is so I think that when you give that kind of pitch, it makes sense, right? Like the traditional TMT investor looks at that and goes, well, this is way more interesting, at least as a hedge, if not like a play to actually like do something interesting.
Because I mean, like that's if you can have like over a 10x efficiency gain in your model, like that's like, oh wow, like this is like a next level model.
It's worth talking about, right? Like, yeah, like let's continue to invest and build this out. Like we are by far, too small to say that we've done the job. My job is not finished by any means. right?
Job is not finished until you have full coverage in Germany.
Roger.
Right. We need it. It's actually wild how bad connectivity is in Germany compared to like as developed of a country it should be.
Yeah, and it's not like a massive geographical area like the US is or Russia or Canada, right? Like it's it is like it is funny how some of the small sort of medium to small sized countries often have like pretty significant technology gaps on the connectivity side.
And to that point, I wonder is it more of a regulation thing, you think? Like it's just slow to move. It's a higher regulatory burden to deploy.
I think that's part of it. Ultimately you have issues that you have to deal with around like what spectrum can you deploy or what can you actually what kind of radios can you put? Sometimes it's like places like what what can I put on my roof? Like some cities have have requirements around like what you can put on your roof or not put on your roof. Some neighborhoods have this. In certain neighborhoods in the United States, like you have these things called homeowners associations, and they say don't put that on your roof because that looks ugly. Like that's like all of these things exist. So it's either, regulation in the sort of big R perspective, or there's also like the like regulation as in like your neighbors are mad at you if you do something like that.
Yeah, well, and they also have some concerns. Like I was talking to somebody who was deploying an antenna, and they got into a whole like they had recently moved their office to another place. They're deploying an antenna on the roof, and the neighbors thought that it was like they had radiation concerns. They were very concerned about like getting cancer from somebody deploying an antenna on the roof.
I mean, this is not that like I remember hearing the stories around like during COVID, like 5G is going to cause us COVID, or actually to use subtract COVID or something. Like there's literally like entirely made up like kind of hallucinations around what these radios are doing.
Yeah, but people see it and they're like legitimately like they believe it, so they're legitimately concerned. They see you setting up an antenna on the roof, like even if there's no regulation, they get very upset about you putting an antenna on the roof.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, that can be I mean that can be its own obstacle, I think. Do you think that like what is like the way that you've worked with governments? Helium, is there like a direct involvement? Is there like benefit to state actors and working with
There,
like you or
I think there's like a couple of different things. One has to you have to sort of comply with whatever regulatory regime that you have. Like that's just that's table stakes. And you have to work with them to like evolve those. Some of these regulations exist mostly because of it's like almost like what's the word I'm thinking of? Like it's there because it was there once and no one came back and updated. It's not necessarily malice. It's really just like no one has had time to update. Things, like the comment that I made earlier about the models are changing on a weekly basis, right? Like, could you imagine a government being able to keep up with that? Like, it's just not possible. And, that's, I, and I think that sort of shows that governments need to learn how to be more flexible, create more sandboxes, allow innovation to flourish, rather than immediately sort of saying like, oh, we're just going to clamp down on this right now. Like the existential risk is too high, so you must clamp it down immediately. Um, you know, it, the and this is where we're lucky that we have we've been able to spend the time in Washington D.C. And we've been able to spend the time with standards bodies. So it's not just governments, but it's also standards bodies, right? Like we work with the Wireless Broadband Alliance, right? And that's one of the standards bodies around Wi-Fi and cellular. And so like we work with these bodies not because like you know like that's the number one way to ship our product, but rather like it's the number one way to make sure that our product can continue to evolve and the regulations can evolve along with our product. And this is actually like really, really, I think pretty important. And at certain scale, you have to put the time in for that too. Early on, you try to work within the sort of gray space or white space that is provided, right? Like, the nice thing about Wi-Fi, for example, is that it's not completely unregulated, but it's not like highly regulated like Spectrum is in the United States and in other countries, right? There is a standard. It's, you can broadcast at certain towers and, you can broadcast at certain range, over Wi-Fi, and that's just allowed. And so we can work within those constraints for what we're doing. So I think that's like, it's important to help. One thing that I've actually found is a lot of legislators, a lot of legislators are naive to what needs to be done and are open to like learning, right? Like you spend the time teaching, and you might have to repeat yourself 16 times, but they do get it over time. They're not, not idiots. They're open to like they're also managing 100 other like projects and 100 other millions of constituents that they have to also manage at the same time. And so it's, time slicing is hard for them, right? And so, yeah, like you educate and then you eventually propose. And at some point they see that as valuable to not just, us as constituents, but others. And then you iterate with them and you keep going. The fact that one of the, past drafts of market structure had a DePIN amendment in it. That took time. That took a lot of time, and a lot of support from not just, so obviously we spent time on it, but many other networks, worked alongside with us to sort of come together, like, here, this is what we roughly think should happen. And yes, it got struck from some of the more recent drafts, but some of the language in it made it to the other drafts. And so we still feel pretty comfortable about, a lot of the language that's in there. Sure, there's always room for improvement. Maybe some of it should be more deferred to the regulatory bodies, and we can just work with them, and we can iterate with them. So like these are all like good things. Spending this time is actually pretty valuable, especially when you're worried, working in a physical space. Like this is where it's not just about your product, but it's also how it interacts with your neighborhoods, your cities, and your states and countries. So it is worthwhile. That was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, but it's all really important. I think it's also a really important topic because not a lot of people think about this particular aspect, which is the regulatory and legislative aspects of markets. Because like it is, I think the way that you put it was really good. Like when you're starting, you work within, the boundaries that you're given. You have a constraint, you have a boundary, but then as you find challenges, you're like, okay, why can't I do this? Why can't we do this? Why is this an obstacle legally for me to do XYZ? And a lot of it is like these laws were written 60 years ago in a completely different environment. So nobody's thought to change them because nobody's told them that this needs to be changed. And that's why companies spend so much money on, obviously like there's an influence factor and like there's like I want to see this happen. But a lot of these things are like, okay, this is why lobbyists exist. It's because like you have to talk, and you also can take your own initiative. Like as a citizen, you can go and lobby for things. Like this is so important especially in democratic countries. Like I can only say in the countries that I've done this in, which is the US and now Germany. And so it's like in the US, like you can literally just go and talk to your congressperson. Like it's very simple. Just say, hey, I don't like this sock.
They want you to talk to them. They are begging for you to talk to them. The fact that you're not talking to them, you're like losing. And they provide a lot of venues for them to talk to them, right? They have the local office. You can just email you can just call your congressman at any time. It's very easy to like. It's you call somebody. You might talk to an LA or legislative aide, or you might talk to you might even talk to a legislative director. But if you keep iterating on that, you might actually talk to your member as well. And you can actually have a real conversation with these folks. You can tweet at Rokana and he'll respond to you, as we found out a couple of weeks ago. Like there's a lot of, they want the input, you're not always going to get exactly what you want and the exact words that you want or anything like that, but like that's part of the process, right? Like that's what democracies are about.
Exactly. Oh, and like in Germany, like I as an immigrant in Germany, I'm not very happy with the healthcare situation here. So I immigrated, like I sent an email to the government here, and I got responded back by like the members of the parliament. I had people. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool that I can just email the councils that they work in and get some responses. So I'm like it doesn't fix the problem, but I can put it on people's map, and like there's somebody who's listening. So like that's like okay, like I got an actual government official to respond to me. Like that's pretty cool.
I think that's right. And when you go to what I've noticed is when you go to DC, you might have a scheduled meeting, but right before it, it's another constituent, and they might just be like a single person, right? Not like through a lobbying firm or not a lobbyist on their own or anything. It's just like someone who is from there. Like if you ever want to go, if you're in the U.S. and you're from the U.S. and you ever want to go visit the White House, you could just email your congressman. Apparently, it's like very easy. And then you get tickets to go to the White House or go to or go watch the Senate. Go to the visiting galleries and the Senate and watch them do the work. These are all like available to us as citizens of our respective countries.
And that's super cool too. Like, and I've done that. So I went with some like 2 different times with the student group to do lobbying at the Capitol. And well, what we found was like you get to meet directly with the representative if they're there and they agree with you. And if they don't agree with your point, then you talk to one of their assistants. Kind of how we found.
Right. Exactly.
But anybody can do this. Like you can you just schedule in advance. You just say, hey, we're gonna come by at this time. Add to the calendar. It's a cool thing. So anyways, yeah, like just to start wrapping things up, tell me like maybe like what's like real quick, like what are ways that people can get involved in the Helium network? Either like in pretty much in any capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in the US and you aren't using Helium, and I know this is more of a German focused podcast, but like if you are listening to this from the US and you're not using Helium Mobile, why not start using it? I think this audience is probably the perfect audience for this. Number two, if you're in the US and you're or in Mexico or in Brazil or as we sort of announce more countries over time, have the ability to deploy coverage. That's number two. If you're not in one of those countries, there's if you go to helium.com, there's sort of a wait list that gives us information about places where there's demand. Go put your country in there. That's another way. And these are all like available to everybody. And I think and then there's always and the last thing that I would say is that if you believe in the vision and you want to sort of participate economically, there's the HNT token and you can buy it on any exchange if you want. And these are all like different ways to participate. And I think that ultimately like the most real thing is to use the product and like really like that's what I would first focus on. So either as a United States resident or if you're visiting, use the product.